voice can break the dark. A single spark ignites the heart. But if we turn when justice calls, the chains we forge will bind us all. When truth is silence, when lies take hold, the cost is freedom, the soul grows cold. No one stands tall while another must fall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, defending every voice, defending every right. For the moment we falter, the moment we stall, we lose our own freedom when we let others fall. You can't stand free while others kneel. When justice fades, it's freedom they steal. An innocent condemned, a crime unspoken, and with it the bond of liberty is broken. No tyrant rules without our consent. Oppression thrives where silence is spent. Stand for the weak, the silence is small, or freedom will crumble for us all. We're mavericks of freedom, guardians of the light, fighting for the truth, for what is just and right. For the rights of one are the rights of all. We rise or we fall by answering the call. Even those we may oppose deserve the rights we all uphold. For if we deny them what is fair, we build our own prison in despair. The fight's not easy, it never will be, but justice for one is the key to be free. We stand as mavericks, together we strive, defending the rights that keep freedom alive. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, upholding every truth, protecting every right. When one is oppressed, we're all in the thrall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. So take a stand, let your courage rise. Defend the truth, don't compromise. For the soul of the world, the writing's on the wall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for
Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Welcome back, everybody. Hello, Mavericks. Special broadcast tonight. Yeah, we're going to eventually dig into some of the top news stories of the day. Mark Carney being asked questions about his ties to this Chinese economic group that he said he didn't know, but there are photos of him. Still says he doesn't know who they are, even though he's in the photo. Do you believe him? Was it just a photo that was taken in passing and he didn't realize who these people were? Or is he lying? I don't know. You can assess. Pierre Poiliever also on the campaign trail today talking about getting tough with crime. But there may be questions about how far you go to get tough on crime and whether at some point you might be violating people's rights. So those questions are all in the mix. And I don't know if I'm going to get into it tonight, but that all ties actually into both of those stories converge and come together and raise questions about Steve Bannon and his connections to the new federal state of China and the corruption charges there, the leader of that organization, and Pierre Poiliever appearing in a picture with people from that group. Politicians. Never a dull moment. And we're right into the thick of this election. And that's why tonight's broadcast is special. It's because we have the guys behind the whole political scorecards movement. They're back. And we're going to talk about that tonight. They have 5 key questions that every Canadian should be asking these politicians before going to the polls and casting votes. So stay with me. When we come back on the other side, the Old Boys Club, of which I am one, will regroup and we'll bring you these 5 key questions that everybody needs to be asking out there. So stay with me. We'll be right back.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching.
The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching.
Let's bring in our guests of honor tonight. Hello, John. Hello, Jack. Hello, Charles. Hello, Randy. Great to have everybody here tonight.
I can't hear you guys.
You can't hear us. Oh, no. What are we going to do? Sign language.
We can hear Randy.
Yes, we can hear you, but he can't hear us telling him that we can hear him.
Perhaps if he goes off and back on again.
We can hear you.
Charles, you have something?
No audio.
No audio. It looks like Charles is frozen.
Yeah.
Let me email him.
Okay. Sorry about the false start there, Maverick viewers, but we will work through these technical issues. And looks like we have Charles back. Are you with us there, Charles? It looks like you're moving again. You were frozen.
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if he maybe just doesn't have his speakers turned up, or he doesn't have any headphones on. I've noticed that.
I just told him to go off and back on again.
Can you hear us now? Can't hear us?
Can't hear you, boys.
You have headphones?
Headphones. Just 1 minute.
Well, did he just hear you?
Well, I was using my version of sign language.
Yeah.
A little lip reading, a little bit of, charades.
Hey, tell me something. In your introduction video there, there's only one Canadian. If you want to call him a Canadian.
Yeah.
I don't. There's only one Canadian. We got Ronald Reagan. We got Obama. We have. Don't we have any Canadians we can quote?
Oh, we do. I have to update that little transition that I put together that day, actually, because Mr. Biden is off sleeping someplace and no longer really hanging out with us. So yeah, that one's a little bit dated anyway. But we have a sizable U.S. audience though, and that's partly why that was tailored.
I love Reagan. I love Ronald Reagan. That was dead.
Yeah. So. Can you hear us now, Randy? Oh, he's getting plugged in.
I think I have the right spot now, gentlemen.
Okay, can you hear us? Yeah.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, it doesn't sound like you're actually using your studio microphone. It sounds like you're on your webcam microphone. You might want to check your settings.
Well, we should have done we should have all just mouth words.
It's always technically fun.
Yeah, we can hear you regardless, but if you change the settings, it might just be that much better. In any event, let's go around the horn here and get people to just introduce yourselves again. Why don't we start with you, John, since you're right next to me in the window?
Yeah, there you go. It's nice to be on the show again, Rick. I really appreciate it. I always have a lot of fun with the boys and yourself. Where am I from? Well, I'm in East Gwillimbury, Ontario, and I've been looking at the freedom issues for some time now. I've joined with Jack and Charles and a couple other people. We put together our principles. And then one day I was scrolling along and I saw this political scorecard. And I said, what's this all about? And that's where I met and talked to Randy. And I said, hey, we got a hand in glove here. It's a perfect match. We believe in a lot of the same things. We're very easygoing. We identify problems together and we solve them. Randy actually is a real good fit for our group. At the end of the day, it comes down to some really simple things. How much do you want to be free? How much control do you want over top of us? And I was actually canvassing on the weekend for one of the political candidates in my area. And I'm shocked how many people, A, are undecided, and B, are for another party that I won't go to. All right. So it is what it is. But it's I can't understand how the polls are indicating what they're indicating, but they're the polls. Anyways, it's great to be on your show again, Randy.
Jack, go ahead to introduce yourself so everybody remembers who you are.
Well, I've got 3 million miles on the highway as a long-distance trucker. I still drive, but I drive just local, run a crane for a roofing company, so I stay busy. I love working with good people. I'm a hypnotist, if you want, for over 50 years. And so I have the ability to see things, the writing on the walls sometimes. And I've been in shock since the 60s, actually. What Goring's saying is that if you tell a lie long enough, people will believe it. And so it's the level of gullibility and the level of naivety, if that's the way you pronounce that the masses have. And then you look at the source of it, it's the mainstream media. So there's a level of apathy and complacency and indifference that is shocking in this country. And I think if we were to have a Doge, we would be more shocked than the U.S.
And I think that Charles might be frozen again.
No,
can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I think your picture is definitely frozen. I don't know if it's an internet problem. Do you want to maybe sign out and then sign back in, log out and log back in? That might fix it then. And we'll get Randy to introduce himself while you try doing that and reboot your login. So Randy, welcome to the program. Nice to meet you. Maybe just get you to explain who you are and this political scorecards website and organization, I guess, to just explain what it is.
Sure. Thanks very much, Rick. Apologize if the audio is not perfect.
No, it's good.
Scramble a bit here, but you can hear it fine. Good. Thanks, Jack. Yeah. I'm like you guys, been through the wars and elected for 10 years, 3 in a row in a regional district in British Columbia, and chairman of the board of the Thompson-Nicola. It's probably the largest regional district outside of Metro Vancouver in British Columbia. So being chairman there for a couple of years, I certainly went through the lobbying issues, the pushback to government, all of the things what we fight against. And so having been through all that, and then sitting back as a retired person and, retired but not tired, and thinking about where do we go from here, I thought, what could I do that would really have impact? And I hooked up with a fellow that was out of Vernon, who was actually an amazing tech person for 35 years. And we created Digital Freedom Canada. And out of that came political scorecards. And the decision with political scorecards was to talk about how we could create transparency, accountability for politicians at all levels of government. And then at the same time, engage citizens to want to know. And that's our biggest challenge. And I know that my buddies here at Our Principles know that challenge well. It's how do we engage people and get them to want to be actively involved in the political process. So that's how I got there. Rick was really through exposure, I think, to the inside, the belly of the beast, and really getting to see how hard you have to push to move the needle within our system, because it's difficult, bureaucratic push, and the desire to change isn't there at the administrative level, because who's going to take the first risk and lose their job, right? And the politicians, they want to get reelected. So we're at the stage now where this onion's being peeled back, and we're seeing the challenges we're facing. So that's where I'm at. I'm partnering with these fine gentlemen and many others across Canada, and we're trying to move the needle. And I can tell you a little bit about maybe something exciting that's coming forward here as well. It's an international effort once we get going. So thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me here.
Okay, and I think we have Charles back.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, your picture's still frozen, but we can hear you. So let's proceed, and maybe it will smooth out. Just introduce yourself again, Charles.
Yeah, I'm a former public servant. Unlike the rest of you here, I lived in the part of the GDP that consumes wealth rather than in the part that produces it, and left it many years ago. And as I said to my boss at the time when I left, having contributed myself to as much as anyone to spending $2 billion on a particular government program that was not well run, didn't have the outcome it should have. And I remember saying to my boss, Bill, I'm 42, I've got lots of years left to contribute, none left to waste. And started to write at that time about ethics and principles and government based on what I'd seen inside. And what I had understood government was when my parents brought me here to Canada as a kid. To a good country, a free country that was based on mutual respect, freedom, real and equal justice for all. And after doing quite a bit of work on my own, studying about history and the principles that underpin sound governments, I eventually ran into some good people who were interested in that. And with them, their input, I wrote the document, Our Principles, the Rights of All Persons and the Duties of Government. And with them and others, got introduced to Randy, who's trying in a different way to influence the political system, but essentially on the same basis, trying to get principles upheld. And so the interest that I have is far more in how do we restore government to the purpose for which it was originally created, rather than trying to worry about the politics of who do you elect and how do you elect them. Because what I've seen is both at the political level and the bureaucratic level, there's a significant problem in that, and that cannot be fixed unless all citizens become involved. So that's why I'm working with people at Our Principles, and that's why I'm working with Randy, who is very much committed to exactly the same thing, which is to getting our political system, our government system, responsive to the people.
Okay, and that's the website, ourprinciples.ca, and that's principles, PLES, not principals like like the noun, but principles, LES, and it's ourprinciples.ca. And this is the website for political scorecards. And Randy, maybe you want to just elaborate a little bit on this and just expand on your explanation and where you've gone with this recently.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. It really started out being a very comprehensive website with lots of data for people to dig into, with primarily the tab that you see that says find politicians being a way for people to access politicians' records and their scorecard based on an algorithmic program that a PhD scientist partner of mine in Ottawa and I created. And now it has morphed into basically, what is it that we could do? And this is the homepage right now, till the 28th. What is it that we can do that would make a difference? And as I said, we're looking at which candidates are willing to join us in the Political Scorecards Pledge that really has people stand shoulder to shoulder in this country for what matters, our natural rights and freedoms, and all the things that are inherent to us that we take for granted most of the time, and yet now we're seeing that we need them more than ever. So we're asking them to stand with us, and so we're showcasing them a little bit. There's a federal MP candidates alignment tab right there, and we can see people that are signed up with us. But most importantly, we wanted the 5 questions that you see there at the bottom of the homepage, Rick. And those 5 questions were developed from groups across Canada, and 60 of our friends, or sorry, many of our friends, and we came down to 60 questions and then boiled it down to 5 that we felt would cut across all levels of government when elections happen, and ask them not just about the superficial issues and policies, but let's talk about, what are you made of? What kind of character do you have? Are you the kind of person that has the right behavior and temperament to represent us no matter what you're faced with in this world? Because we know we're up against NGOs, we're up against world government issues, we're up against, I'll hesitate to say trade tariffs, because I think that is a whole other issue of, getting people to the table and renegotiating the World Trade Agreement and the alliances in this world. But to find out what kind of temperament these people have when they get faced with the onslaught of being in the legislature and party whipping, and are they going to be able to stand for us? So that's the idea, was to get these questions in front of as many people as possible, as quickly as we could, with 14 days left now, and ask them the last 2 questions at the bottom, which are self-reflective. So ask yourself if that candidate's there for you, and will this candidate stand, as I said, for our shared natural rights and uphold the principles of a free society? So that's the target right now. As we move past the 28th, we'll be moving into how do we monitor and how do we provide some transparency and accountability in a way that is fair. It deals with voting records, the facts, and it also deals with publicly verifiable statements, and it deals with the things that aren't conjecture or opinion, but really provide citizens of this country with a way to analyze and decide, how is somebody doing? Are they doing their job the way they said they would? What were their statements? Where are they now? Are they paying attention? We need to get to this level of participative government, regardless of whether that's a free Alberta or whether that's a full-blown Canadian revitalized Canada, or whatever this happens to be. It's up to each and every one of us. So that's the focus of Political Scorecards. And if we have time later, I'd like to talk a little bit about Citizens Portal AI, which is a system that's under development now to bring this kind of thing to everybody's coffee break at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they have a look at what matters to them and what has their politician been doing within the last 24 hours, so that they can be participative in government. So that's the big picture.
Okay, so before we get into the details on each of these questions, what is it that how would you like people to utilize this? Are you encouraging people to take these questions to all candidates debates or meet the candidate events and pose these questions to their local candidates and their local ridings as we move toward this election on the 28th in Canada?
Yeah, great point, Rick. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see a link there that says how to use how to use the questions. And if you click on that one, then what that brings up is a lot of suggestions about just exactly what you're talking about there. Share the questions, share the how-to page with everybody so that everybody your groups. Urge the candidates in your area to sign up on the pledge and stand with your neighbors. And then there's newspaper, media, social media, websites, posting every day, and we're encouraging people to post the questions every day. And you don't have to take a side. You can post it and say, hey, look at these questions. What do you think? Or are you interested in this? And then there's the next part of it is, okay, so we've asked these questions of ourselves and politicians. What is there that we need to listen for to get to, those issues I mentioned, which is the temperament and the behavior and the personality. So we are getting the right people in place. So do they have what it takes? And so that's a guide. It's there for everyone. And then there's one other link on the homepage that lets people click into social media posts and to get the questions to download if they want to. And it's right there.
I see. Download the 5 questions.
Yeah,
PDF.
You can download the stuff right there. And then the final
poster and everything. Yeah.
And the final one is take the political scorecards People's Pledge. And that's for anyone, politicians included. So I'll just get you to click on the link there. Oh, there you go. Just scroll down. So you see the second bullet in that. That's specifically for politicians and elected individuals to say that, they're going to, if you read that carefully, it says they're going to act with knowledge, integrity, transparency, and accountability, and support those who share the values, stand united and remain informed. Together, we actively uphold and share the principles of a free and open society, as was mentioned before. So it merges both what a Canadian citizen or people of Canada would stand in as their truth, and it would also then, as that second bullet says, if you are an elected person, you have the option to stand with us as well. And when you scroll to the top of the page, Rick, you'll see the pin map. Those are not just individuals. Those can have up to 10,000 people behind them that have signed this pledge. It's all over, and it's been out there for almost a year now. And it's pretty impressive when you look at the people that have taken this to heart. So we need our politicians to do it as well. So that's a quick look at what we're asking people to do and be part of. And, like they say, the rest is just dessert and good times. But this is really where the rubber hits the road, is getting these politicians and everybody in Canada to get in lockstep together in a good way that unites us, that saves this country.
Okay. Any comments from anybody else before we start digging into these 5 key questions?
If I could, the questions are clearly not nonpartisan, and they're really focused primarily on what the job is of those whom we elect to public office. The job being to represent us, and so they're really trying to get at the moral character of those who end up in positions of public trust, and we want to see. When we want individuals to really look and ask the question, will this person represent me and what I value and what I think Canada stands for and what is needed for my family and for the future of this country? They are not partisan. Very carefully, any trigger words have tried to be avoided. They are questions that I think all Canadians could ask legitimately and say, is this where do people stand that are running for office compared to what I think should be on these very principled underpinnings of why we elect people to our government positions?
I have a question, and that is, hang on a second, I just dropped it. I shouldn't do that. I don't know if that's as bad as dropping a flag on the ground, but here's the Constitution. So why do you need these 5 questions beyond, say, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for people to refer to? What purpose do the questions serve? Is this a way for you to just frame a conversation for people to determine where the mindset is, or the attitude, or the knowledge level of these politicians as these questions are raised?
Rick, if I can, yes, to quite a bit of what you just said, but I think what's been happening over the past few decades, we believe we're voting for individuals, but at the end of the day, we're not really voting for individuals. We're voting for a party, and it's all party driven. It doesn't matter how good that person happens to be. When they go to Ottawa and they sit in that desk, and a vote comes up, and the party says we're voting yes, and you'll never ever notice that in the House of Commons when you're watching it on television, all one party votes one way, the other party votes the other way. There's nothing in between. So when we vote, we think we're voting for the individual, because think of it like this: we have a fisherman in Nova Scotia and we have a fisherman in British Columbia, and they may have very similar problems, but because they're driven by two separate parties, you could have a liberal one end and a conservative or NDP at the other end. They won't vote to make it work. So we're not sometimes voting for the best person, and these are the questions that need to be asked of that person who is running for politics. I hope that's helped.
Can I weigh in on that too, just a little bit?
Sure.
I see the challenge in the media. I see people saying, well, hey, the judge, decided the case this way. Well, is the judiciary, are they a captured agency? Are they honest and fair with the Canadian public? Is this something we need to be aware of? So we need to ask questions that drill past all of the superficial stuff. I think that's part of it too, right? Because, you look at Sam Cooper and what he's unearthing right now as a journalist in relation to Chinese interference, and something like Scott McGregor and the Mosaic effect. What kind of attack are we under, and who understands this? And how are they going to stand tall when it comes to those difficult situations and decisions from an international perspective? And do any of them understand what Mark Moss says in relation to Trump's 4D chess? That don't look at the superficial, look deep. We need people who are deep thinkers, who understand the world perspective, and they do understand the local issue at the same time. Not many get past that. So we're trying to drill down and say, really ask them the questions that matter.
Of course, someone like Sam Cooper might have a little more credibility if he didn't use movie clips and tell people that it was actual security camera footage. And he might have a little more credibility if he didn't come out with allegations not supported by actual evidence, which results in not just one, but two multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuits. So as a journalist, I kind of take exception to people who engage in sort of shoddy work that then gets amplified online and shared and shared and shared and becomes something of the truth because it gets told over and over again. Not that I'm going to accuse him of lying, but as a journalist, I really do wish that some people would take a little more care in their craft. But I just get, not to get into the weeds, but I can't let this guy just, not you, him, him do the public a disservice like that, unless he's really going to back this up. I could go on and on about him because people have been trying to inject that information onto this platform. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to stand up against that and just call it out for what it is. So I'll throw it back to you and maybe we'll just get back on track. But I had to stop it right there because I've been in the journalism game for like 40 years and I'm just appalled.
Yeah, I think I agree, Rick. There's so much out there that needs to be validated. Absolutely. And I guess the point that I'd like to make is that regardless of truth or lies or not getting to the facts or whatever, the issue is for me that some of the stuff's being raised and it never was before. It's an onion being peeled in front of the public, and it gives people a chance to ask the questions and to find out the truth and delve into it all. As long as it's done in a very effective way, it would be good.
A professional way, exactly. An ethical way.
Yeah. So point taken. Agreed. I
because if you
don't,
you can
didn't go down the road you wanted.
Lives. It's not cool.
Yeah, and we're seeing out in BC a lot of issues raised around the very issue without any of those journalists' involvement that cast kind of a question on what's going on within the political sphere and the influence from external and domestic areas. So these are big issues for our politicians to struggle with. And I look forward to, people really getting involved and trying to find the truth.
Indeed. So any other comments before we dig into these questions, which are, fundamental? Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Well, I'm going to go back to you when you held up the Constitution, and that word was the first word I learned when I was a child. The first big word I learned how to spell in a spelling bee, actually. And I've always had an interest in it. But when we were in Ottawa with the convoy, the word respect, and same with these questions, the word respect is the word I see. Respect, honor, other words too, but respect especially. Is that the Constitution was not respected by those that were chosen to not just live by its values, but to implement them, fortify them, and make sure that all Canadians were treated fairly under the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And those three documents were useless to us in Ottawa. And people are still being crucified, basically financially, in the courts using taxpayers' money. So I look at results. And for me, the results say that if you don't have people of honor and virtue and discipline and respect representing you, they can play with these documents. They can ignore them. They can put them in the court and fight you on them, which is what they've been doing. So these questions, if I myself personally, I was involved in the questions. I was busy. But if I ask a politician or a representative at any level to look at this and they won't even read it or they don't answer or reply, that's an indicator right there that they have no respect for me or for the office. And I think that's a good purpose of the questions. Well,
it raises a broader philosophical and question regarding what degree of limit do you put on people's rights, and how much of a role should government play in that? And that certainly came to the surface during the pandemic with the lockdowns, the masks, the mandates, all of those things. And I think in many ways, you raise some very valid points, Jack, because I think the government and even the people, the citizens of Canada, failed an important test at that time because our freedoms were not protected. And I guess that's really what this exercise is about. Am I correct in saying that this is a test for politicians to determine whether they're really on board with protecting rights and limiting government power when it comes to limiting our rights?
Well, go ahead, Charles.
If we look at what we are supposed to have, it's a representative democracy. And in our Constitution, there is no mention of political parties. They have no role at all. The role of our representatives in Parliament is to put a check on government. Their job is to decide what legislation can happen and what money can happen, and therefore what programs can happen. And the pandemic, the convoy was mentioned, and there's an interesting illustration that was provided, a very strong one, in comments provided by a Liberal MP, Joel Lightbound, a couple of days before the Emergency Act was put in place. He had a press conference at which he read a very well-prepared speech, initially in French and then in English. So it was not off the cuff. It was very well thought through before he did it, and he answered questions afterwards. And what he said was that this has gone on long enough. People have been here. They've made their point. But I have a concern, and this is a Liberal MP. I have a concern that my government has not met with these people. They came here to ask questions. And we, the Liberals, called an election during the pandemic, an unnecessary election, and we had a strategy in that election that was the strategy to win. And that strategy was to press our policy approach to dealing with the pandemic. And we set out, and these are now his words, to wedge, to divide, and to stigmatize Canadians. So he was very, very much opposed to what the government, the Liberal government, his party was doing, and he was very, very committed to listening to the people, having a dialogue. 2 days later, the Emergency Act was imposed, and he was whipped by the party to vote for the imposition of the Emergencies Act. And so here we have the contrast. Did Joel Lightbound represent the people who elected him to keep the government under control, or did he not? And so if we look at these questions, these 5 questions, in large measure, they are really asking, whom do you represent? Do you work for me, or do you work for some back rooms where they tell you what to do and you are merely a cog in their machine? So it's the questions are really aiming to get an understanding of the position of the person who is running to represent us in Parliament. And it's with that in mind that they are really structured not around policy issues, not around partisan issues. They are really structured around the character of the individual and whom that individual will represent and how they will behave in the Parliament as the representatives of their constituents.
Okay, so did you want to start working through these, and then we can kind of dig into each question and why each one is important?
Would it be okay if I just added a little backgrounder before?
Oh, of course, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, your camera is off. I don't know if you're aware of that, but we can't see your video.
I am not aware of that. Okay, well, I'm looking good then. Well, I will mess with that as soon as I finish my point here. Thanks, Rick.
The other guy is frozen.
it's going really well. But that's okay. We have the audio, so we have the information, and it's a good discussion. So just carry on.
All right. As my father used to say, carry on as if you know what you're doing.
That's right.
Yeah. So the backgrounder is this, with political scorecards, it started out kind of full blown with the BC election last October. And we had scorecards out there that, showed candidates and representatives where they stood. And the idea was to send out questionnaires to all 393 of them and get their feedback on 33 questions that mattered. So did that twice, received probably 40 replies. So very limited because, nobody moves, nobody gets hurt. They don't want to take a chance. But the ones who did reply, out of the 40, we got 18 that are now MLAs. So there's a bit of a reference point, and that's good. But how much work it took to get that far, Rick? So difficult. And they don't want to be upfront about it. So that's how this transition happened to the questions. So the reason the questions are there is we empower the citizens to ask the questions, and they're the ones making the decision and deciding who they vote for. So that was kind of how the genesis of this came about. And I think the strategy is better because, you get canned political answers and all the rest. This gives the citizens the answer or the question to take to their representative in whatever form they want, even if it's only one. And, they ask a good one, or 5 of them go to a meeting and each of the 5 of them ask a question. Or, in some of the meetings that are held, they're now using like Slido and some of those apps where people can use their phone, and there's 500 people at the meeting, and somebody puts in a question, it comes up on the screen, and everybody votes on whether they want to hear it or not. Well, you can do that with these questions in that environment and use technology. So we're trying to assist those types of initiatives for people. So sorry, that was the backgrounder.
Well, that's okay. So let's dig into the first one. Transparency and accountability. The question is, what will you do to ensure government is transparent and accountable? So, Randy, I'll throw it back to you. Take it away.
Okay, I'll quit playing with my camera. What are you going to do to ensure the government they're transparent and accountable? So, the question then is, I'm really, if the candidate answers in whatever fashion, it could indicate to you whether they even believe in transparency and accountability, which would be a huge decision point. Or they could say, well, there are certain things we can talk about and some we can't. Okay, well, then you can follow up and say, well, what is that regarding? And, it just lets you continue to open-end questions, ask open questions to get to the point where whether that person is going to be strong enough to stand up front and center and say, look, I want to be transparent with my constituents and I'm going to be accountable. And then it leads to other questions like, how will you be accountable and things like that. But I think that's the way to go. Rather than closed yes or no's, we're getting to the point where we can drill in. And if you've got somebody who's got the temperament and the right responses, and they're not giving the party line word whiskers, they're actually giving you a real answer to this question. Now you know that you've got somebody in front of you who's got the right stuff.
Okay. Gentlemen, anybody else want to weigh in on this?
Anytime. Go ahead, Charles.
No, John, you go.
I was just going to say, anytime you talk about transparency and accountability, and when you represent a party, it's very difficult to stand out there on your own. So you've got to make sure that you're following the guidelines of the party. And if they're not up to date, if they're a new candidate, for instance, who has very limited background, they're going to play it really, really safe. And that's the importance of these questions, is to drill down. As Randy says, it's a starting point where you can start to drill down and ask those questions, and you can find out very quickly how that person thinks, how he's going to react, what sort of oompah this guy actually has, or if he has any. All right. So it's important to ensure that we're getting to people that will answer the questions, because accountability, that's a tough one. Those are past things. You want to be able to say, well, I'm going to be accountable for this. I'm going to be accountable for that. But that's a party line. That's not an individual's line. Transparency, well, that's how we voted. Yeah, you can see that. When it comes to accountability, that's a past. It's in the past tense. You want to know what they're going to do in future. So it's really important to understand.
Charles?
The question also, it says, what will you do? So it's actually putting the emphasis on the candidate. It's taking it away from the party, and it's giving the constituents, the members of the public, something to think about that's different than policy. And because when it comes down to policy or programs that government develops, 5 years from now or 4 years from now, you can't tell what the issues will be that come forward. So it's an attempt to really get the public thinking about the character of the individual whom they will choose to represent them. So what will you do is at least as important as the second part, transparency and accountability. It's in some ways causing it's educational in the sense that the public is choosing someone to represent them rather than in all sorts of things that will come up, and get the questions away from the policy and into the character of the individual, him or herself.
Yeah, and I think that this is front and center right now with all these questions surrounding Mark Carney and his investments and Brookfield, because really what is being asked of him is transparency. Disclose your assets. Let us know, what your investments actually are, and do you have any kind of conflict of interest? But then I threw that back, into Poilievre's court, in my small way here on this program the other night, because he was demanding that Carney divest, like sell off all his assets, then give the money to a third party and put it into a blind trust, and then have it reinvested into things that he's not even aware of. I said, well, if what's good for the goose is good for the gander, you as well, Mr. Poiliever, all of these guys should be doing that kind of thing, so that we know exactly what they hold, where their potential conflicts are. And but I don't think Pierre Poilievre gone that far himself at this point. Not from any of the research I've done, but do you guys have any further thoughts on that, Jack?
Well, I read a post the other night that when Mark Carney was chairman of Brookfield, the Kushner group was hurting financially, and they rented the building 666, which is now the number has been changed, I believe, to 599 or something. No, but back then the building was 666 in New York. I think it was a 47-story apartment business building. They rented it for 99 years and paid the Kushners $1.4 billion. Now, Jerry Kushner is the son-in-law of Donald Trump. So, I mean, Trump and Carney's got a connection there. So that's like, where's the transparency in that? Like, so they're still digging at it. Some people are digging into it to see what's going on.
I dug into that myself just a little bit, and given that there's an election on, and what I discovered is that Mark Carney was not the chairman of the board. He wasn't on the board of directors with Brookfield at the time that actually took place.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
However,
Go
however,
ahead,
what I understand is that there was a Senate investigation in the U.S. Into how that came about, because it's a very unusual arrangement that someone would rent a building for 99 years and cough up 1.1 billion US dollars. And so while Carney was chair of Brookfield, he was asked to appear at these U.S. Senate inquiries, and he refused. So there are issues there of transparency that would be nice to know, and there are other issues that are quite interesting too, in that Carney obviously knows where his investments are, and he knows that Brookfield is deeply invested in modular housing and in heat pumps, two of the policies that he's very strongly promoting now. On modular housing, Brookfield bought a modular housing company, for $5 billion. So there are no slouches in that game of producing modular housing. So is there an interest there? And from what I understand as well, the normal practice in investment firms is when someone creates an investment fund, the person who creates it is entitled in perpetuity to an annual payment that's a percentage of the value of the fund itself. And from what I have read, so far we know that Carney seems to have created two funds, one in the Bahamas and one in the Cayman Islands, that total something like $26 billion. And the figures that I have heard are typical for the annual percentage is between 1% and 2% of the value of the fund. So those questions are out there. How valid they are and what is going on, we don't quite know. And certainly Carney last October went to China when he was advising Trump, and within 2 weeks, he met with head of one of the Chinese banks. Some $250 million was loaned or somehow invested in Brookfield. So there are these links that may give him long-term financial benefits directly from such a firm, and we should know. Now, I am going to go to your other point about Poiliever. From what is clear, Poiliever has admitted he owns at least one rental house. So he's making money on a speculative thing in housing, and I understand that the similar situation may exist with Jagmeet Singh. So if we're looking at people who are making speculative money, those kind of things, the public should know in case there is a policy that's taken that favors the kind of investments that our political candidates may be favoring or promoting while they're in office.
Yeah, all valid. Yeah, all valid points. It's I think difficult for any politician of any economic status to get into politics and maybe not have some degree of a conflict of interest financially, because if you hold investments, especially in a company that has diversified holdings, there are always some sort of linkages, especially through an investment management firm like Brookfield or BlackRock or any of these big companies, because they're so widely diversified into so many different areas of the economy. In fact, the research that I was doing also indicates that Poiliever himself may actually own, have some investments in Brookfield as well. So it just all this stuff, what goes around seems to come around, and all these politicians, I think they need to be just more transparent. But there are different levels of transparency within the Canadian system that are required of politicians. You know, the higher you go up the ladder, the more transparency is required through ethics standards and even legally. And if you're just a low level backbench member of parliament, you don't have to disclose nearly as much. There, you have more privacy rights under the current rules. But I would say, yeah, we just need more transparency across the board. But that's, just my general view, for whatever that's worth. Not that anybody cares, but
Rick,
back to you guys.
Tell me something, Rick. I mean, what is the use of an ethics committee when you have someone like Justin? I mean, how many times was he found to be in violation of ethics?
Yeah.
So an ethics committee is just a joke.
Yeah, we need more accountability on that front for sure. Yes.
Until we get a group of politicians that are willing to answer these questions and live by the principles, nothing's going to change.
Yeah. And I would say too, Jack, that with regard to everything we talked about previously, violations or, infringements on people's rights, if the government had simply done the right thing and protected our rights from the very beginning, we wouldn't even be having probably this conversation tonight, because it wouldn't be necessary. But I digress.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to weigh on this a little bit, and I agree with what I'm hearing. And I know that, the higher you get is true, the more accountability required, the more transparency is required. I think that's why this question is aimed from the grassroots up, because if they've got 343 representatives that stand for their constituents, that actually have some principles and some ethics themselves, then they look at a leader who isn't being transparent, then maybe they need another leader. And that's where we have to start with this, because top down, we know where that has gotten us, as Jack mentions, with ethics and the whole swirl of what used to be a parliamentary system that worked fairly well when people were principled and ethical, and it's just gone off the rails. So that's where it comes down to transparency, accountability, and I mean, I was a small p politician, and I had to declare all my assets, and I had to be transparent every year for 10 years about where I stood, because it matters in principle, no different than it does at the top of the government, because in principle, you have to recuse yourself. You've got to be honest about what you own. You've got to be accountable to the people that you're making decisions for, because it's their livelihoods and it's their life and their family that matter. So, it's as simple a question in number one as it is a potent and powerful question, and a difficult one for politicians to answer. So, I wish you were there, Rick, when we went through all 60 of these and we boiled it down to 5, and we kind of went, oh my gosh, you guys, how do we make this really good? And I think we've done a pretty good job.
Yeah. And just one other point on Mr. Carney, generally speaking, and I don't even know if this has ever been done before, but this is one of the reasons the governor of the Bank of Canada or the governor of the Bank of England would normally never run for politics, because the bank governor is supposed to be arm's length from government, and they are supposed to be making decisions that are best for the country and economic decisions, mostly, fiscal, macroeconomic decisions, without direct influence from the government. And so when you take someone like Carney or any person who holds that position, you're supposed to be apolitical. And then when you even get into the political arena, you automatically raise questions about, well, was this guy making decisions when he was the governor of the Bank of Canada that would then benefit him politically after he left that position or not? And so there's all these questions which you will probably never fully get a real answer because it's murky, right? What action did he take while he was the Bank of Canada governor? Did he advocate and print a lot of money because he thought that would be better for him when he entered the political arena? Or did he, did you see what I'm saying? That's why a governor should really recuse normally himself or herself from running for political office, because now he's really low-hanging fruit for political criticism just on that front alone, and then it just spreads out from there. And with so many financial assets, because the guy is clearly like wealthy beyond my dreams. I can barely imagine how much money he must have. He's an easy target, and rightly so, I think. But anyway, back to you guys.
When you see him exit Brookfield, the question is, I guess rumor has it there's 6 million exercisable share options sitting out there in a trust, but is that true? We don't know. But if that kind of thing exists, wow, those are futures. So, talk about conflict. That is really a tough one right there. If we don't know that exists, then wow,
Yeah, he's a lame duck from the word go. He really is. But anyway, should we move on to the second question, or are we done with the first one?
Rick, one last point. One of the real main concerns about transparency here is that he hasn't told us who is managing in trust his holdings. Right? For all we know, it could be Brookfield. Think of that.
I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, he gains to make gains on all that if that is the case. So, I mean, that should have been pointed out right from square one. I mean, I think it was said he has 120 days or 60 days plus another 60 afterwards to say that. So is he just running the leadership thing and trying to be prime minister? And all of a sudden, if he wins, great. If he loses, he's got nothing. He hasn't lost anything.
I think you probably hit the nail on the head there. Yeah.
Looks good on the resume.
He's not breaking any rules at this point, but he's not being fully transparent either.
Right. And Canadians should react to that. Like there should, including the media. The media should be pushing every day on that question, but it is what it is. Okay, back to you.
Look, just before you go on, look at the game they played when they introduced Carney at the Liberal gathering there in Ottawa, and he was speaking on the podium, and sitting right in front of him was Justin Trudeau. And when Carney said that he was going to shut down the carbon tax, Trudeau stood up with his hands in the air, clapping like a seal on steroids. You know what I mean? And then they call it snap election. It's all as a hypnotist. It's all mind melt stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where these questions come in. These questions put people on the spot. Do you have ethics or do you not? Do you have morals? Do you respect your constituents? It puts everybody that's running, if they have what it takes to answer these questions. It'll show you.
So Jack, with your background, are we trying to break the trance?
The trance is built on fear, and so you can't break a trance that's built on fear except with honesty. Right.
Yeah. Okay. Question 2. Just read this. So this is about political representation. The question is, will you place the rights and needs of your constituents ahead of the interests of your party or government?
Yeah, very clear, right? Are you going to be whipped, or are you going to stand for your constituents? That's what it gets to the heart of, I think.
Yeah.
It sure does. Yeah.
So that's pretty straightforward.
Make an observation on this. New Zealand shifted from a first past the post system to a proportional representation system some years ago, and the elections commissioner did a survey of incumbent MPs prior to the transition from the first past the post to the proportional representation. And I don't remember the precise numbers, but the numbers were roughly like this. The question was, do you represent your constituents or do you represent your party? And prior to when they had first past the post, 70% said they represented their constituents and 30% said they represented the party. After the transition to the proportional representation system, the numbers flipped. 70% said they represented the party and only 30% said they represented their constituents. Now, we don't have a proportional representation system here, but because of the extent to which party members of parliament are whipped, when it comes down to hard votes, I would say that 90 or 95% of those whom we elect actually represent their party rather than representing their constituents. And so this is the question that goes back to the point that I made earlier about Joel Lightbound. My government made a mistake. It handled this badly. It decided to use its mandate and masking and vaccination strategy to wedge, divide, and stigmatize Canadians so we could win an election. And then 2 days later, he votes to implement the Emergencies Act. So this is a really important question. If we're to have a parliamentary democracy based on the principles under which Parliament was originally created. Parliament was created to exert a restraint on government abuse. And there is a distinction between government and Parliament. And the distinction has been that the cabinet is the government. And the Parliament is a separate thing. Now, I know they're stuck together, but in many ways. But when it comes right down to it on hard votes, the party dominates. And that totally undermines the intent of representation of the public. And so this question is really asking, will you represent me, my rights and my interests? Will you protect my rights and interests? Or will you do what you're whipped to do? And we know what the answer will be for most parties. But asking the question has two purposes. One is to see if you can get choose candidates who will represent the constituents. But the other is to get the public thinking about what our Constitution is all about as a representative democracy, and maybe to start to choose candidates who are more likely to live up to that traditional role, that purpose for which Parliament and representatives are chosen, or to be pulled aside by the conventions that parties have been able to impose on Parliament to remove that effective representation of the public.
Go ahead, Jack.
Simplified this, in 1990, when we did the truckers' protest in Ottawa and had the trucks on the hill and all that, we went into the House and sat in a public gallery. We met with the Liberal caucus when Lloyd Axworthy was Representative Mulroney was in power. And after the meeting with the Liberal caucus, when I was walking down the laneway, I heard footsteps behind me. I mentioned this before, running. And I spun around, and it was, now he's at Assiniboine, I thought, but Assiniboine actually was a Manitoba riding, which disbanded in '88. So I'll have to figure out who he was. But anyway, he came up behind me. He said, "We can speak openly out here." He said, "Let's go for a walk." And we took a quick walk. And he said, he said, "I believe everything you said in there and everything I heard is all true." But he said, if I was to say one word in favor of what you're speaking about, he said, I would lose. And he listed clinics, hospital, schools, all kinds of community center. So a lot of times the party will put a person in what would you call it, servitude, by just telling them, if you speak out against this, we'll screw you in your riding and you'll never run again. And my friend who ran for the Liberals in Nova Scotia, spent 27 years in depression from what they did to him. If they want you, they will cut your throat literally or virtually.
The other thing. Oh, sorry, Randy. Did you want to say? You want
Just
to go
quickly, John. I'm just going to say that the whip word is whipping the, the representative, but in doing so, they're whipping the people too.
Yeah.
So it's a multi-pronged thing. It's terrible.
They do that in the U.S. What is this word whip? Because that's what I wouldn't make. If I was in Parliament, I'd be in jail half the time for assault.
You'd be bleeding all the time, Jack.
I just want to say one thing that a lot of us don't think of when we're doing these voting for candidates and parties and so forth. We're always thinking of the House of Commons, that we're electing these representatives to the House of Commons. But some of the biggest challenges that people don't realize is that the Senate gets a lot of the bills that move from the House of Commons to the Senate, and they can hold it up, they can push it back, they can do a lot of things, and they're not elected. They're appointed, and there's no end to their lifespan in the Senate. We really need to look at that whole area when we vote, because right now the Senate is made up of a majority of liberals. So no matter what other party gets voted in, they're going to have a struggle. So a lot of the things that have been promised by other parties may have a real difficult time getting passed. So we need to really think, and that gets back to who are you voting for, the party or the candidate. So
many questions could be asked, right? You could be asking, okay, if I vote for you, are you going to be in favor of creating a bill that takes Senate reform forward? And if your government is formed, will you do that? Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways to ask this question. Sorry, Charles.
Historically, the Parliament was created of three bodies. It had the Commons, it had the House of Lords, and it had the clergy. And the reason it was structured that way in the 12th century was that the educated people, the people who read, typically were not common people. They were clergy or lords, and there was a notion both in Europe, continental Europe, and in England, that the idea that I forget the term that's used, but there was a higher duty on those who had better education, better knowledge, a better experience. It was a duty to protect other people. So the notion of the Senate is in fact it follows from that idea. The Senate is there to provide sober second thought based on deep thought about what the issues are. Now, some years ago, when I was working in government, a fellow with whom I worked used to say, it's the house of sober first thought. And you actually used to have some sober first thought in the Senate. I think you have less and less of that. And in our system of government, constitutional monarchy, there's actually a level of sober third thought. And if you look at the oath that is sworn by the king when he becomes king, he's given gauntlets, he's given an orb, he's given a scepter, he's given a sword, he's given cloaks. And with every one of those adornments that is given to him, there's a statement of what the duty is, the responsibility to protect the rights of everyone, to show no privilege. And so the idea of having the people protected at three levels in the passing of legislation or the approval of budgets is a deeply important idea. And to have our Senate, House of Sober Second Thought, become a place of political hacks, of people who have been in political office, who have been in journalism promoting so-called the fourth estate, that's really become part of the fifth column against the people. We've lost the control, the guarantees that were built into our original system. And certainly that first level of protection is by having people's representatives. And so that second question is profoundly important, not just for today. It's profoundly important because historically our whole system is premised on the idea that the job of everyone in that system is to protect the rights and the freedoms of all citizens. And we have seen the erosion as governments at all levels have taken over even the courts. And we have seen, for example, Supreme Court justices, once they retire, being engaged by political parties to fight their case. And so these important institutions that are there to protect our rights are increasingly part of a big mass that is increasingly controlled by a smaller number of people with those fundamental rights of individuals and the duty to represent them and to protect their rights having been slipped away from those institutions. I'm sorry to take this beyond the immediate here, which is to look at how we select our representatives in that first order of protection. But I think it's important to recognize from the comments about the Senate that all of the other institutions that are there to protect our rights and freedoms have also been affected by the gradual erosion of the functions of those institutions as guarantors of our rights.
So, Rick, you can see we said to Charles, so now say that in 14 words. Not easy.
But Charles keeps a balance. He keeps us balanced, right?
Yes, he does.
Okay, so we move on to the third question here: sovereignty and foreign influence. I would say very relevant, especially in this election. The question being, how will you honor the priorities of your constituents when faced with pressure from foreign organizations, NGOs, and lobby groups? Okay, Randy, take it away.
Okay. I think immediately of Maggie Braun and what she's doing at her grassroots level to try to assist municipalities in thinking about what does it mean to be compliant with 2030 green agendas, and that it's not just LEED buildings. It could be partnering with an institution that puts in a farm in your neighborhood. It could be creating green spaces that are better for livability in your community, and challenging in a way that says, the people who elect you are paying you to represent them, not paying you to meet some kind of an agenda that's coming at us internationally through ICL or FCM or from offshore. So, it's no different when you get to the government level that is in the House of Representatives. They've got even greater issues they're dealing with. Look at what Lawyer Lisa is unearthing now regarding the World Health Organizations and their influence on countries. They have got an office that represents every one of 172 countries, and Canada's office is sitting in Washington, D.C., has a direct line connection with Health Canada. So, these are challenges that, wow, how are you going to make sure that a decision made at that level isn't going to create a real problem in your hospital or in your school system or in your constituents' ability to live a good life, and have a reasonable day. So it's as top down and as complicated as that, and as simple as asking the question when you're standing there with somebody putting a motion and a bill forward that says, this is going to undermine my constituents. Or maybe I don't even understand it well enough. And so some of the questions are designed like this one. So somebody says, well, I need to know more about this. This is a difficult one. Well, how are they answering that? Are they going to say, well, I don't know about this? Or are they going to say, this is really interesting. I need to dig deeper on this one. I need to find out exactly what you're talking about here. You find out about that person and that representative by asking this question. And, so it's multi-leveled. I think it's multifaceted, as they all are. But when you talk about foreign organizations, NGOs, and lobby groups, you're talking about international, domestic, every level. And they come at them. I don't know, what is the number of lobbyists, or what, 25 to 1 or something for each representative in the parliament? So they have a lot of pressure from all these areas, and boy, they got to dig in and learn a lot if they're going to be able to handle that. So this is for the people who ask the questions that are voters. Like, do you even realize that they have this kind of pressure? Maybe this helps a voter understand how deep this goes by asking these questions and listening to the answers. That was the intent, I think, guys, unless you've got something else there that I'm running out of air on. So go for it.
Go ahead, Jack.
Well, sometimes you have to look outside the country to see the truth. Sky News in Australia, I found, was one of the best. BBC used to be at one time a decade ago, but now I found that Sky News Australia tells a lot of truth. But then I look at Georgescu in Romania. Now, I don't know if he's dead or in prison or what's happened to him. But the interview I saw just before they arrested him, he said the first thing in the first minute as president, he was going to remove all NGOs that in the country because they were all being financed by George Soros, and they were controlling the country. And people just need to have their eyes open and realize the amount of money that's coming. GFL, like okay, so I have a couple of tanks I have to get rid of at work. One's waste oil. It's got 1,200 liters left in the bottom, and another one was a fuel tank. And the rules have changed now. We have to get rid of these tanks and spend a fortune by new ones. So we called it in GFL or Green for Life. We it's the only one now. The Crystal Clean, they bought them out. And so GFL come in, and I told the safety rep before they got there, I said, the quote's going to be $1,500 or more. And they said, no, there's no way. The quote was $2,700 for something that we would have got done for $350 before GFL took over. So my personal belief is that GFL and GIP, Green Infrastructure Partners, are all backed by outside money. And so these NGOs are just ravishing this country, and people have to open their eyes and look around the world, I think, maybe to get a perspective on what's going on.
If I can just add a little something here. When we talk about sovereignty and foreign influence, I like your example, Randy, of Maggie Brown and what she's doing and so forth. Mm-hmm. But some of the real things that are so obvious, and the government hasn't done anything about it. When we look at, there was a report a little while ago about Chinese police stations in Canada. Like, just think about that. Chinese police stations in Canada. And nothing has been done about it. Yet we're having all these politicians going to China, making deals and this and that. Again, we get back to some of those earlier questions, like your political representation. Like there has to be some real ethics, and there's got to be some downside in being able to get rid of some of these people. Like, I honestly believe recall legislation should be mandatory in every level of government, only because sometimes you can't wait 4 years for a new election. But we've got to be able to do things where we know are hurting people. Because I live just north of Markham, Ontario, where there's a large Asian municipality, a group, and I can almost assure you there's got to be a police department, Chinese police department there, and those people must worry. Even the fella who was a liberal candidate, Chung, was it, who was bragging by saying this conservative candidate, someone can make $1 million Hong Kong dollars if they take him to the Chinese embassy. Now, if you think about that a little further, where is he getting the support from? Is it from the Liberal Party, or is it from his Chinese connections? So there's something that really has to be looked at. And I'm sure there's other areas that are similar to this that are going on out there. And by us, whoever is in power, whoever's in government, when they don't do anything and we don't have any way of controlling or getting to the root of it and getting an answer or a decision made, there's something wrong in our parliamentary system, in our constitution. That should never happen. It's my thought.
If I can give two examples here, I think it was Randy mentioned Maggie Braun and what she's doing in respect of responding to ICLEI. ICLEI is effectively funded by United Nations and our federal government, and it provides money to municipalities if they implement a set of policies that come out of the UN Sustainable Development Group. And those policies require massive densification in urban areas, often overloading roads, overloading sewers, and imposing huge costs on those who live in those areas now. In Calgary, the Calgary government moved to adopt the policies that were funded through ICLEI, through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, supported by the federal government, driven by the UN's policies. And they had public consultations, and in those public consultations, the response was almost universally, we do not want this. We need to have our policies developed locally. We don't have to have them dictated to us by the United Nations. And despite the opposition, the Calgary Council voted to take the money and impose the policies. Now, the people in Calgary, I didn't see the petition, but I have heard it reported in a number of places. 500,000 people in Calgary and around signed the petition to say, do not do this. But the Calgary Council did not back off.
Nope.
So there you have a policy that involves municipal governments, provincial governments, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the federal government, and United Nations being imposed on local areas. And the local people have no ability to control their own representatives, even at the municipal level. So I'll use a second example, which is, to me, really bizarre. This happened in Ontario at the provincial level. And it works in a slightly different way. In Ontario, we used to have land title records held in the registry office. You could go to the local registry office, you could look at records. You had to pay a small fee to get them, to get copies, but you could find out the whole history of your property, the adjacent properties. It was there because the government kept control of the records of land ownership. Under the McGuinty government, they decided they wouldn't do that anymore. They took all of those records and they parceled them up and they offered them for sale. And so all of those land records are now owned by an American company. So if you want to find the records, you have to have a process to get into the American company to pay very substantial fees to see the records of land ownership in the province. When we start taking what should be public records, what public control, public policy driven by the needs of the people, and transferring it to foreign companies, selling off our hydro transmission network to a private company, then they have an immense amount of power over the government and over the policies we pursue. And that's something that we need to really consider. And it's a different aspect of that third question. How will you honor the priorities of your constituents faced with pressure from foreign organizations, NGOs, and lobby groups? Because certainly that is happening at an increasing level, including through the way in which private-public partnerships are run across the country.
Mm-hmm.
Have we lost Rick?
We lost Rick? Yeah.
Well, we can keep going. We're good at that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great point, Charles. I really like that and that thread of thought through all of this. And I look at all five of these questions and I think about the challenges we're going through as a country. Will there be a referendum in Alberta? Will there be a clear question for separation? All the what ifs around will we reestablish a different type of government in Canada? And if you look at each one of these five questions and you go through them all thinking, okay, well, what if it was a republic? Would these questions apply? What if it was a different kind of government system and not the British Westminster parliamentary system? Would these questions apply? And when I've asked myself that question and gone through it, I think, they're pretty ubiquitous when it comes to what people need in their representation. So I'm liking them from all of those perspectives. And the threats are not going to go away when we're talking about, foreign and domestic or NGOs and lobbies. When I mentioned earlier that, the security analysts for Canada that look at the threats coming from offshore, from whatever country they might be coming from, they're constant every day, thousands of them, hacking into, as you said, Charles, maybe it's not hacking into a foreign-owned hydro system because they already have it. They don't have to hack into it. No. And do they want to pull the plug on something or mess around with it or delay something on a factory somewhere? Like, this is about our sovereignty, and it's about the protection of our country and the ability for us to maintain and manage and control our own economic lives. So I like number 3. I think it's a powerful statement, and it's tough to ask that question of a group, let's say, that you're in front of and actually get to the granular level that Charles is talking about. But at the very least, it raises the issue of, do you understand the pressures as a voter and as a representative? So it's pretty powerful.
Randy, do you want to move on to number 4?
Yeah, we can. Hi, Rick. I'm glad you could join us. Yeah, there you are. we kind of beat the heck out of number 3, and we were just moving on to number 4 there. So
okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Do you guys need to take a break? Why don't we do that? And then if you guys need to take a break, we'll just take a very short pause here. We'll come back, and then we'll dig into number 4. So stay with us, everybody. We shall return.
Sounds good.
Maverick News. The world is watching. Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching. Maverick News. Fighting for freedom.
Okay, I'm just looking at some of the news headlines tonight while we wait for these guys to rejoin us. And I got to tell you, I just came across this story. I don't know what the deal is, but J.D. Vance fumbles Ohio State's NCAA football championship trophy as the Buckeyes visit the White House. Don't! Oh my God. That's like dropping the Stanley Cup. Let's see here. Oh my God. I think I have video. I got to show it to you. I don't know what I wasn't aware of this. Let's take a look together for the first time, shall we? Here we go. I'm afraid to look. Did he break the trophy? Is that what we're talking about here? Oh my. Hang on, let me bring it up on screen. Where is it? Here it is. Here's the video. Oh, this could be a political faux pas. I'm going to pull the audio down. I don't want to copyright check. What? Oh my God. Oh no. Oh man. Oh. You just put it down, man. Don't pick it up. Yeah. I've often thought that, you know, how terrible it would be if you were on a Stanley Cup winning team or something, and somebody hands you the Stanley Cup and you drop it on the ice. Oh, that would be awful. Okay, let's bring these guys back. Could you imagine doing that, John?
Oh, I couldn't know. I'll tell you, looking at that trophy, it's like two parts. It comes apart. Like
yeah. He broke it
very well at all.
Nothing, a little super glue and some duct tape.
Yeah.
You know, man. Reminds me of Bob Stanfield. I think they threw a football at Bob Stanfield probably 25 times and he caught it. And then they threw it a 26th time and he fumbled it. And it destroyed his political career forever. And here we have a guy taking not a football after a 25 successful catches. We have a guy taking an important trophy.
Oh man. Oh, that's you got to feel bad for somebody like that, because you know the media is just gonna run
butterfingers.
Yeah, for years. That's right. Yeah. Politics is a tough gig, really. It doesn't. You can come in. It's pretty rare to see a politician leave at the end of their career popular. Usually they're very, very, very unpopular by the time they're done.
Yeah, but some moron failed to instruct them that it's a two-part trophy.
I guess
that's
so.
all. They just failed. I mean, that's the poop of here is, and whoever failed to instruct them, hey, be careful, it comes apart, right?
Probably it was the Democrats arranged the event.
Yeah.
That won't bother J.D. Vance. He'll just laugh that off.
Oh man. I've always thought about that. You know, if you're on the Stanley Cup winning team, somebody hands you the cup, the last thing you want to do is trip and fall, or, you know. And they take these cups all over the place too. I'm surprised those things don't get damaged more, dropped more. Maybe they do, and we just aren't aware.
I was told that the Stanley Cup, the one that they bring out is not the one they bring out, and all that is not the actual Stanley Cup. It's
probably not. Yeah, it's just way too valuable. Yeah. Way too valuable. Yeah,
it's in the Hockey Hall of Fame, I understand, in Toronto or something is what they say.
It's just don't.
I hear it's been moved to New York City, like Brookfield.
What's more Canadian than that? Oh my! It's just waiting for Randy to come back. I don't know if his camera's off. Are you there, Randy? Or
yeah,
there he is.
Okay, we can't see you, but we can hear you.
I could hear you, but it said you could see me, but waiting to add. So I don't know. Maybe it's
your camera's just not activated. That's why I didn't add you. Actually, I thought.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's okay.
I figured that out last time. There we go.
Oh,
But if you look at how they Justin prorogued government and then brought in Carney, then they have a snap election. I mean, it's all designed to. Okay, the new Canadians who are now not that new now, they come from many of them come from backgrounds that they come from. How would you say that Trump called them, holes, right? A lot of them come from very, very poor political backgrounds. And so when they get here, and I almost can't blame them to a certain extent, they're not really interested in what's going on politically. They're like, they're busy turning this into Little India. Like back when I was trucking, you got a ticket if you parked on the side of the road, if you parked in your driveway, if you parked in an alleyway, you got a ticket. And now they jam in 25 trucks through where maybe only 8 trucks used to fit. Now there's 25 trucks in there, and it's crazy, especially around Brampton, but now it's Oshawa, everywhere. And so they really don't want to get involved in politics. Our politics. They have their own thing, their own way of making money, and their own way of doing business, and that's it. They bring in 10,000 containers a month. And their big thing is to get it distributed as fast as possible. So we now go shopping at a place called Sky Farm Markets. Have you heard about that? The Asian markets. There's one in Oshawa just up from Beecher Street on Simcoe. And my lady and I go shopping there, and they have incredible food. Okra and durian and stuff that you just never ever see ever before, and it's delicious. And I look at the packaging, no French on much of the packaging. So how it gets into the country without that, I have no idea. But there's a whole underground market going on that these people have no interest in politics. They only have interest in packing the money into the bank. That's it.
Well, shall we dig into number 4, censorship and free speech? The question being, what role do you think government should have in regulating speech? Randy?
Wow. I think everybody's got that one on top of mind, with everything we've been through. And right now we're in the middle of an election, right? And we should have viewpoints from all over the place. And yet we've got censorship on social media due to the bill that's in place. I forget, is it C11 or whichever one it is there that's regulating social media? And we should be encouraging as much open dialogue as possible. So what role do you think government should have in regulating free speech? That's a huge one. There's the online issues that are debated a lot, but I think where I see the rubber hitting the road is that, there are laws in place in Canada that handle a lot of the issues that need to be handled when it comes to whether you're crossing the line or not, and in free speech. So I don't think we need regulatory processes to manage it, but that's my opinion. But asking that question of the representative, that's where you clarify if that person really has a good handle on what this means to all of the country all of the time, and not just to select cherry-picked issues, for instance, like the monetary issues around Facebook or not. It's bigger than that. And so we have to have people who understand that these are principles that can't be compromised. And at the very least, if someone brings them up, they need to be adequately debated and they need to be clearly understood. And so, yeah, that's how I view it. I think it's a very important question, because people who are faced with making decisions in the House that may influence our rights and freedoms, and the biggest one is our right to our own free speech, and there should not be censorship around that.
One of the things that I look at, and Randy, you touched it when you're talking about government. Should government be giving corporate loans out, giving $1.3 or $4 billion to the CBC alone? Never mind the other $800-900 million it gives to the other news outlets. Should media companies be turned into conglomerates where only a couple companies manage all the news, manage all what you're seeing on television and so forth? It's a hard thing to recognize when there's so many layers in between and you don't have control of it other than turning it on or turning it off. And if you're a young person, let's say you're 16 years old and you're on social media, that's like a lifeline to you. And all of a sudden it's being tracked, it's being monitored, it's being censored, and on and on. It makes, in my opinion, government has no place for it. And when they call about these corporate welfare bailouts for corporations, I think the media, they have to take the hard. They have to make the decisions not to take that kind of money, because we, the population, we need to step back and say, no, you're now controlling the heart of what the direction, what the message is going to. And it's one thing to elect people. It's another decision when people have the ability to direct you, not the other way around. So we have to be very, very, very careful when we talk about freedom of speech going forward. That's what I think, anyways. Jack?
Go ahead, Jack.
Well, again, I look outside the country because usually what's out there is coming this way anyway. I look at England where they've got that hate speech law in place, and the guy, he was sitting at a booth and somebody came up to him and started speaking to him, and he's hard of hearing. So he said, could you please speak clearly? And the next thing you know, he's got police officers coming to charge him with a hate crime. You know, it's, and so what's involved in this? Lawyers. Sorry. So, you know, there you go. They make money no matter which way the pendulum swings. Who wins the case, who loses the case, they always make money. And a trucker's stock and trade is freight, and a lawyer's stock and trade is mayhem, chaos, you know, discordance, and so there's that. And I mean, we have too many lawyers in government, is my belief. And there are good lawyers, obviously. There's wonderful lawyers. I've known many of them, but there's too many corrupts, and so there's money. There's a lot of money in this number 4. There's a fortune for lawyers to take this stuff to court.
I think the primary thing for me too is when you look at the regulation of free speech, if that's a policy or a law that's regulating that free speech and silencing one group, then I worry about the manipulation of the narrative, you know, and that's what we really have to guard against. And, you know, thank goodness we have so many great places to go now, like, well, Rick's program, you know, alternate media, people who are out there letting everyone have their say. It's just the way it should be. It's like it is at the coffee shop, you know, when we're there and we're talking, everybody's chatting about what they think, and you get that real cross-reference perspective. And when that's eliminated and somebody can control the narrative, now you've got a slippery slope, and you know that's kind of the lead into tyrannical behavior. So
can I ask you a couple of questions? Who do you think is controlling the narrative today?
I don't think it's people here in Ottawa, and I don't think it's people in the United States. I think it's I think it's people who have no country, who have no real ethics other than what they feel, what they want, what they need, and they have the power to do it.
Who's they?
Well, I know we touched on this one time before, Rick. People like BlackRock, Vanguard, States Isle, Berkshire Hathaway. They're
controlling they're controlling the narrative.
Sure. Absolutely. Let me give you this example. Pepsi, when I was growing up, and Coke, the real thing, the next generation, they were at odds with each other. Who's going to be number one? Do you hear that today? Do you know why? They're owned by the same group, BlackRock. That's the reason why. They own 90% of the world's economy. I know it sounds strange, but it's all about money.
It seems to me like you follow the money, but then where does the money lead? Sometimes the money leads to ideology. Sometimes the money leads to special interest groups, and as it seems these days, you can't put your finger on one thing. It's like the comedy of errors, the combination of everything. We're living in this time in history. There's so many competing issues here that, it's hard to figure out any one day and one person that's trying to control the narrative. But there is influence, I think, internationally that is probably trying to control and manipulate where we go as a country, where we go as people in the world, because it's all about resources at the end of the day. And it's all about, controlling, I think, control.
Yeah. Big part.
Do you think that Elon Musk has any influence?
Sure he does.
Yeah.
Of course he does.
Yeah. And do you think the Chinese have any influence through, say, TikTok?
Sure they do.
Yeah.
Can they?
And when you guys talk, and as someone who comes from, media, worked in media all my life, Canada, I hear the whole defund the CBC thing. I get it, but there are other layers to this, and even within, working at CTV, it's more complicated than just get rid of the CBC, because in Canada, we are a vast country. It does not pay to set up a news bureau or even to be a journalist in a small town, even in Southern Ontario, let alone, say, the Northwest Territories. And so the media system that has been in place for quite a long time does involve government funding, because in order to provide, say, local news coverage in very small communities in places across the country, there is support in place and even regulations, because if you get a broadcast license, those airwaves and even access through the cable systems, that's a public interest. It's not just something that can be or should be profit driven. That's why the CRTC has what they call a promise of performance for broadcast companies, also governed by ethical standards, by the way, for journalists. So that are separate and apart from and arm's length from government itself, through professional organizations like the Canadian Association of Journalists and the Radio, Television, Digital News Directors Association. The point that I'm sort of making here is, in order to preserve Canada and our culture, however you want to define that, in Canada, we've had a system set up where government does support local news coverage, journalism, various kinds of journalism, even in remote places where it is not profitable to do that. But it's only because of those government supports that those local stories are told, that local culture is preserved and promoted and shared nationally through our country. And so I don't think this is nearly as black and white as it is spun up. And the other thing is, especially by people who have other interests when it comes to controlling the narrative. And when people say the government shouldn't be involved, it's also a safety issue. It's a national security issue. So I don't see how you can remove government entirely from the equation when you have foreign governments who do not play by the rules, who have really ulterior motives, hidden agendas, who misrepresent themselves in our country and in other countries around the world with information warfare campaigns, outright psyops, lying, cloaked as sometimes as journalism. And I've been in direct contact with some of these people myself. I know how it works. And so to just give it this blanket, government shouldn't be involved, you're leaving not just the country, but the citizens, people entirely open then and vulnerable to outside influence, outside attack, foreign interference in our political system, leaving the public open to manipulation before they go to the polls to vote. Why do you think you're being bombarded the way that you are right now through social media with all of this different kind of messaging right now? And the platforms, these social media platforms, we're not prepared. Our system was not prepared for this. Our laws really have not been prepared for this, because now you have anybody, any Tom, Dick, or Harry can set up a podcast like this one and pretty much say anything they want that may or may not be factual, maybe even be outright lies. They're not held to any professional standard at all, because they're not like journalists. They're not part of any professional organization, not held to any standard. And that's okay. But at the same time, you need some level of transparency, even for these people, and some way for people to know what kind of information they're getting. So it's not that simple. And I think we do need some layers of protection in order to determine what it is that we're actually watching. What is the motivation? Where are the source? What's the funding? Who is this person? And why are they saying what they're saying? How are they being influenced? I see a lot of, as a media guy who really has dedicated my career to free speech, I also see that you can't have a real serious conversation about free speech, especially in today's environment, without talking about where you place those limits, because there's a big difference between free speech and malicious speech, free speech and outright, deception. And there is a lot of that going on even today in a lot of countries around the world. And it's coming from not just one country, but, many countries all at the same time. I don't know if you guys are picking up on what I'm laying down here, but it's dangerous in my view.
Rick, I think you have to be. You can't make it so black and white. And in my view, let me use an illustration. Blacklock's reporter, I think, are very serious reporters. Yeah. They do a very thorough job, and they make their money not by taking anything from government, but by selling subscriptions to what they print. And you pay, I don't know, $300+ a year for a subscription, and that's per person. But the government has been paying $300 and distributing it widely through government departments. And Blacklock said, "Look, you can't do that. We've got a legal agreement with you. We're selling you one subscription for that price. If you want 10 subscriptions, maybe we'll work you a deal on 10, but you're going to have to pay for each one." And the government refused to do it. So Blacklocks took them to court, and the government has spent a great deal of money pushing back against Blacklocks. So it's not that if government money goes into it, it's regulated fairly. Government money may go into it, and it may provide a bias. I'm going to give a comment from a meeting I attended probably 25 years ago now.
Yeah,
it was at a time when CBC was applying to CRTC, renewing its ability to proceed, and there was a meeting at a local university where senior vice president of CBC and some of the very senior news staff were there, and they were making their presentation, and at the end, after the question period, I approached the vice president and I said, "Look, there are provisions in the act that brings the CBC." Gives the CBC its mandate. And that act says you have to represent Canadians, all of Canadians. And you're not actually doing that. Your bias is clearly to the left. And he responded by saying, "Well, we see our mandate as to counter the other media, which is all right, is all towards the right." And I said, "But that's not your mandate. It's very clear your mandate under the Act is to represent all, not to counterbalance what you think is happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
And he then said to me, well, we're head and shoulders above the rest. And I responded, well, you might be shins and knees above the rest, but you're nowhere near the head. And what Canadians need is information that really is unbiased, that is thoughtful. And so the control of speech by government funding has, I would argue, led to a massive bias. And if we look in the current election, what we see is that there are many important stories that are not covered at all by the mainstream media that are critical of the Liberals. We also see that Carney recently said he is going to pursue that bill to put tighter control on the horrible, and these are my words, but they're close to his, the horrible American social media that is providing all this bias. And we have to regulate and control this. So that looks like it's an attempt not to encourage open, constructive debate. It's to stifle debate. It's to prevent discussion. And the importance of free speech is that speech and debate avoids fights. You resolve it verbally. You engage in the discussion. You come to a resolution. You bring your point. You listen to the points of others. And out of that emerges a point of view that makes sense. If you stifle it, what is your option? Your option is violence. And we increasingly see violence taking place. And so while I don't disagree with your point that we get a lot of manipulated information coming from other sources, it's not so simple that you say if you fund the media and the media has its control, its mechanisms of controlling the soundness of journalism. Well, journalism, in my view, is not journalism anymore. It's propaganda. And it's in large measure government funded propaganda. So we need to
Which
find
government, Charles? Which government? Because if you think it's the Canadian government that is the only government doing it, like I've got news for you, okay?
No,
the Chinese are spending millions. The Russians are spending millions. If the Americans are probably spending more than anyone right now to influence our election.
100% agreed. 100% agreed. But it's not a blanket thing that government has to give funding. We have to find a way to allow all legitimate views to be expressed.
Legitimate views, yes.
And when I say legitimate, let me say not threatening views. The views can even be not legitimate. They can be silly. But silly views can be under open discussion and debate, can be disputed and shown to be silly. But if you stop them from being said, if you control all the avenues, then what you do is you leave the door open to anger, division, hatred. And that's the kind of thing that ultimately leads to violence. So free speech is vitally important.
Nothing leads to more violence than a foreign influence campaign designed to divide people by funding both sides, information warfare on both sides. And I would say that the solution, not that I have the solution tonight, but the possible solution to all of this is a requirement for transparency, real names, real disclosures. Where is funding coming from? What is this media outlet? When I see Russians, the Russian government running just through one guy, like 47 different fake news outlets, spreading false information. That's not free speech.
Rick, if I can go back to the question, what role do you think government should have in regulating free speech? It doesn't say that we should have completely free speech. It doesn't say there shouldn't be some regulation.
Yes.
So the purpose of the question, and I think it's well worded this way, it's to begin to provoke that discussion. And the discussion, some may say, well, government should control everything. And others may say, well, wait a minute, it's a complex issue. We need to have thoughtful people talk about that question.
Right.
And what we're seeing now is more control, I would say, and more emphasis on control in a way that prevents much legitimate debate. And that's what really, to me, that's what really matters. So the question is really, it doesn't stand for free speech. It doesn't say there shouldn't be some regulation. It really provokes the thoughtful question. And many who we choose to sit in public office will simply say, government should be able to say any, have no role whatsoever. And many others will say, well, government should stifle everything. And I have people telling me when I say, well, here's some facts about what happened in the inquiry, Russiagate inquiry. They say, well, where did you hear that? And I say, well, I read it here, here, and here, and I've read the report. You shouldn't be reading that. You should be listening to CNN. So why are you looking at those illegitimate sources? And I think the tendency to prevent meaningful, open, honest discussion is increasing as we in the West are being pressed by those who are becoming more opposed to freedom, more opposed to individual rights, and more authoritarian. And
there's no such thing. There's no such thing in Canada as free speech, and I know what Charles, what you're saying is wishful thinking, because all you have to do is look at the evidence and look at the results. All you have to do is look at question period, or it's mayhem and chaos. Or look at Lisa Robinson and Pickering, who tries to speak freely and gets her paycheck cut and getting trashed and just torn apart. In 1972, I first started studying the power of suggestion, and I started studying it, and I studied under some of the greatest on this earth. Ravine was one of them. So in 1956 in Ontario, they passed a bill through the legislature. It was called the White Paper on Hypnosis, and it said that to hang a shingle in Ontario, you had to be a medical doctor, a dentist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. And the least of those was a psychologist. So I signed up in 1980 and this bill was repealed in 1998. But I signed up in 1980 at Atkinson College, York University, for a major in psychology. And meeting with the head of the department after a while, she explained to me, when I told her why I wanted to do was work with children, burn centers and stuff like that. She explained to me that all the major advertising firms in New York and Toronto were active on the campus. They were wining and dining, and I saw it with my own daughter when she became a corporate lawyer. They paid for her last 2 years. They did everything they could for her to win her over to their firms. And so all these advertising, Philip Moore's agency was huge at that time, representing Canadian Tire and Reliable Toys and all these different big, huge firms. And so the only job you could get was really, if you were going to be honest, was a counselor in a high school for $27,000 a year. I think is all they paid back then. These advertising firms were paying $75,000 to $150,000, depending on how you were doing. So if you wanted to be corrupt and make a lot of money, you could. From that, what took place was, like, the CBC has been corrupt forever. Anybody who knows subliminal advertising sees it. And I often taught from stage, and I often taught a lot of my clients, if you want to see real subliminal advertising, it's just turn off the sound to your television and watch it like you normally would. And what takes place is like you buying a car thinking you're the only one in the neighborhood that's got one, and suddenly you start seeing them everywhere. You become aware of what's going on around you, and what you become aware of what's on the screen, and you start seeing all the subliminal advertising in the background, the Coke can, or it gets a lot more serious than that. There's a lot of the level of sexual subliminal advertising is off the charts. It's absolutely unbelievable, almost. And violence, the idea of violence is subliminally put out there all the time. And so it's like when they write movies. I work with Netflix, and I left them because of one of the movies they make called The Boys. They have like 20 people to 100 people in the script room, and somebody will yell out, "You GD person" or whatever. They'll yell out something, and somebody else in the script room will yell something back. You see nothing, you hear nothing on radio, TV, in the movies that hasn't been scripted by psychologists. Everything you see. So everything you see and hear, and then back to the television thing. You used to be able to darken your television and turn the volume. So hand it over and let the thing play while you're busy working and play like you normally would. And you'll be shocked at how often you go over and lift up that curtain to see what's being said. And 90% of the time it's animation. The Simpsons, or it's some show like Trailer Park Boys, Married with Children, these mindless programs that are subliminally designed to lower, first of all, the father husband thing, and to lower your own self-esteem. I deal with it at work all the time. I get guys, matter of fact, we just have a guy he never showed up this morning. His self-esteem is so low, it's unbelievable. And I've got 2 or 3 like that I have to work with to try to help them. And it's all from being inundated with all the crap that's on the internet, and everything's just inundation. There's no honesty, and it reflects the leaders we have in Ottawa. It reflects many of the leaders we have around the world. They don't want that for us.
Jack, if I can comment, you mentioned Lisa Robinson and Pickering.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart.
Maybe it's important to look at free speech beyond simply the media, because here we have a member of council who makes a comment, and she's driven out of council. We see members of parliament who cannot raise questions. If questions are raised about the impact of immigration on the availability of school services, hospital services, housing, you can very quickly be labeled racist. It's just the way that speech has been so captured in order to impose agendas that it becomes impossible. Sorry?
Media that's used as the hammer. That's probably, I mean, Rick left CDV. I mean, like you said it earlier, Randy, the Rick show. Like, Rick show is honest. You can say pretty well whatever you want here, right? And he's not afraid to jump in and correct us or to have his point of view. It's an open dialogue. This is very rare. And I tried doing some with Rebel News. I'm sorry, but that didn't work out because what's his name there to lead that thing?
But if we're electing someone, if we're asking questions,
people I don't like.
But if we're asking questions of candidates in elections, and we're saying, what is your view about should government regulate speech? So frequently, those whom we elect have their speech regulated and controlled, as you point out in the question period. The answers are scripted. They have nothing. They're not answers. The things that are said after questions are completely scripted. Read Jody Wilson-Raybold's book. Read who's the other Liberal MP who quit at the same time, the medical doctor. Their books are so absolutely clear that they were not allowed to respond with honest answers. So control speech is profoundly important in regulating what the public hears. And if we're asking a candidate, what do you think the government should have? That also, applies to their behavior and the regulations and control of them in their seat in the House of Commons or in the provincial legislatures or on municipal councils.
Hey, Jack. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. And if I am interrupting, continue with the other thing. But I'm just curious. When you get a moment, Jack, could you comment more about what you were talking about with Rebel News and your experience there? I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. But if we were midstream in that conversation, I apologize.
It's okay. It'll only take 30 seconds. I was asked to introduce somebody, a good friend of mine, a doctor, Jeff Wilson. He's an author. He's an epidemiologist. He owns his own business and all that stuff, and he's a good friend. He asked me if I'd introduce him to Ezra Levant, and also to Henry Hillebrand and a few others that were speaking at an event we were at. And so I did. And I discovered quickly at the event, if there's no money in it for him, then forget it. Just go jump off the bridge. He's downright almost rude, and I just finished donating to him a pretty good chunk of change, and that I wash my hands of him. I don't.
Yeah, I want to come back to Rebel News in a moment and get your view on a couple of things. Did you want to continue with the other thought stream there? Did I break?
I just wanted to jump in there just for a second on that thought stream before we leave it.
Yeah.
I think just by virtue of asking the question people ask themselves, oh, regulated speech. How's my speech being regulated? And it's very basic, but we've got to get down to that level, I think, because, we're dealing with a world now where if your attention span is 7 seconds, 9 seconds to get a sound bite in, and people are just jumping between one thing and another, they're not even thinking about whether they're being regulated per se or not. So to have this kind of in-depth conversation, and perhaps one that you wouldn't have any other time other than an election, this is what it's about. This is about saying, okay, take off the blinders, have a look around, and give yourself a little bit of a wake-up call here. And look at it, because this is the time people are talking about it. May 1st, is everybody going back to sleep? Are we going to be lulled into sleep again? Nope. Or are we going to talk more about this? And so, that's, I think, why we tried to formulate the questions, was just to stimulate the thinking and to get people to think critically. Because they're, and let's talk about that for a second, if I could, just the educational issue. Our kids are going through a programming system. They're not taught really from the ground up to think critically. Think how to think, not what to think. And that's overused, I know, but it is truth. And so if we don't have a reform of our educational system, we're trying to fight this stuff forever. So we've got multi-generational work to do if we ever hope to have any kind of an understanding of what free speech is in this country.
Absolutely.
Can I just come back to the Rebel News thing? I'd like your thoughts on journalism. When I'm looking at Rebel News, I think they blur the line between journalism and activism. There are different kinds of journalism, of course. You have feature filmmakers, people who write books. You have people who are involved in activism journalism. But when I see what Ezra is doing right now with his third-party campaign, which he's sort of trying to separate from Rebel News, but he's saying that they can spend up to $600,000 to effectively launch this attack campaign on the Liberals and Mark Carney, with his truck that drives around with, the picture of, Carney with Ghislaine Maxwell on the side, and all these other messages that he wants to put out there. That's like a campaign done as like a third party political thing that he came up with. And that's big money too. And I'm wondering, first of all, we don't really know where the funding is coming from. We don't, and he's saying they can spend up to $600,000. That's a substantial sum of money. He's supposed to be some sort of a news outlet, but to me, that really, really blurs the line. And even though he's running that as trying to run it as a separate entity, it's still definitely connected to Rebel News. And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, because it's just, what is journalism? What is free speech? What is activism? And if he's doing these kinds of things, does the public not have a right to then have full disclosure from him and his organization showing exactly who is funding this political campaign?
Doesn't that beg the question, like, okay, well, what is pharma? What is Big Pharma? Can they do that in their political campaigning? And do they do that? And what about liberal parties and, conservative parties? All of these people have found that. And what I like about what Rebel News is doing, aside from whether you like what they're doing or not, is that it's bringing to light the fact that we've got these third-party, big money pocket agencies that are weighing in and influencing these, are trying to influence our opinions. And so it's not just isolated. They didn't just find it. It's been going on. So it's interesting.
But what I'm saying is Rebel is taking money, and from whom? And if there's a news organization independent and they're taking money from China and they're presenting themselves as a Canadian news outlet, and you're not able to see where that funding is coming from because there are no regulations requiring funding disclosure from said media outlet, whatever the name of it might be, is that okay? So for you to be watching something and not know that it's actually the Chinese Communist Party that's funding this news outlet that is presented on a social media platform as though it's some Canadian thing and you wouldn't even know, or it could be any other government for that matter. Or what if the US government has interests up here, or even big, and they're funding a front for a news outlet, but because they're privately owned, independent, not governed by, the same kinds of restrictions or regulations or requirements for disclosure, even ethics through professional journalist organizations and those standards, then how would the public even know? Because that is definitely then foreign influence and foreign interference that the public is not aware of because they're getting information that they think is unbiased or independent and therefore trustworthy, and people are being disarmed because they're being told you can't trust any of these media outlets. Therefore, in this black and white universe that people tend to paint for themselves or create, if that's not the truth, then these guys over here must be telling me the truth. It leaves them open to this this suggestive information that's being bumped into them. I think it's really dangerous because now we're leaving ourselves wide open to foreign influence and interference, and it's not even just the money coming in; it's the algorithms. So Elon Musk and Steve Bannon even talked about this in a long form interview he did about a month ago, and he indicated that there's nothing that can stand against Elon Musk and X, even over in Europe, as he launches these algorithmic information campaigns to influence elections over there. I mean, he just came right out and blatantly said it. And Musk and Bannon seem to be at odds a lot of the time anyway, but he's fully aware that this is the level of influence that he has.
He didn't do that well in Wisconsin.
No, he didn't.
He spent 20 million. He spent 20 million, so he doesn't have. Just let me explain something here.
Yeah,
it's Ezra that it's not like Rebel has some good reporters and they do some good stories. It was just my experience with Ezra himself. That's all.
Yeah.
So I saw like David Menzies tries to do his best, and there's that girl that got hit in the face when she was with us in Ottawa. She had got that shot in the face.
Alexa Lavoie,
yeah, and there's some others. I see good stories from him, but I don't subscribe to them. So,
but to the point though that you make, Rick, I know that when you talk about Musk and you talk about Starlink and its ability to beam into any country without regulatory approval, that's a huge issue to be able to influence one way or the other. And, does that mean that there should be regulatory approval or not? That's a whole other question. But if foreign interference is an issue and you've got this kind of loophole that Levant has found that's already being exploited by many other agencies and organizations.
Actually, nobody's done what he's doing. This is you listen to him. There are different levels of influence, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah.
No, that's okay. I'm asking the question, is there an arm's length political agency that has a separate entity that is funded up to $600,000 that might be funded or may not be funded by a foreign country that's trying to infiltrate Canada to have influence over the United States or whatever that might be, whatever their objective is, I think we need to be looking at this stuff. And shouldn't that loophole be slammed shut? Those are the kinds of things that, if we're talking about the democracy and the opportunity for people to be adequately represented and to understand what they're hearing, then we need to kind of level the playing field in that regard and not have it all over the place. But from my personal perspective, I grew up in a world where, I was told a lot of things that I thought might have been true that ended up not to be true. And as a result of that educational process in the school of being whacked around in hard knocks and having to make up my own mind about how things work in this world, you learn. And that wasn't because the speech around all the people I knew and where I was regulated. That was because it was unregulated and people were able to try things and do things that turned out to be false. And then I had a perspective, a yin and a yang. I knew what was true and I knew what was false. I knew what could be done and what might be done. And that's the world that we unfortunately live in. It's not altruistic in a sense that everyone is good. So, I guess it's really, as you say, Rick, it's a very difficult situation, very tough one. But at least asking this question, we find out whether anybody even has the depth of understanding to tackle it.
I don't think our politicians do. Many of them are too old, especially people in the Senate. They probably, a lot of these people have trouble sending email, let alone understanding the ramifications of artificial intelligence.
Right.
We haven't even really learned how to cope with the impact of social media on our society, and we're already into the realm of AI. Right. I mean, I just played a clip the other night from the Trump's Secretary of Education, who called AI A1 in this speech he was giving. Oh my God, we're doomed. We're doomed.
Yeah, it's right on top of it.
Rick, turned into cyber transhuman bots by the end of the year.
To give a good example, we still have people right now looking at computers and social media who never did figure out how to set the clock on VHS.
That's right. That's exactly right. We never learned how to set the clock, and now we're going to be taken over by the drones. Oh man,
Rick, I'd like to interject here for a minute. About your ageist comment about the being in the Senate being too old.
I'm there too, man.
I'm too old to be in the Senate now. So
what makes you think I learned how to set the clock?
But I think behind this is a premise we're making, and it could be false. Behind Randy's questions, the premise is that Canadians are capable of critical thought, or they can become capable of critical thought. And that is, it's not clear to me with the bias that has happened and the 7-second attention span and the way media is handled, it's not clear that can happen. But if it can't happen, then we will not have the kind of democratic government in a free society that I hope we have. Now, others here know of a letter that my father received when I and all of my family became Canadian citizens in 1963. And in that letter describes a Canada that was worth living in. It was a society of free persons based on ancient liberties. There are many very good words: rights, privileges, and responsibilities. No, obligations is the third word, that are described in that letter. And you look, and that's what attracted so many to come to this country. But that country, I think, can only be preserved if people are capable of critical thought. And these questions are premised on the idea that people are capable of critical thought rather than being influenced by the soundbite. Is that possible? I don't know. But I hope it is, because if it is not, then we will not have a country of free people anymore.
Charles?
We have to go ahead.
Okay. Well, I ran a program called ARP, Addiction Recovery Program, for 5 years. And if there's one thing you learn is that when people become addicted to something, whether it's alcohol or drugs or sex or technology, believe it or not, computers, when people become addicted to anything, they have a tendency for their free agency, free will, or critical thinking to go out the window.
Yeah.
And so and it's like when you're working with an addict, you cannot. I have a very good friend. He's passed away now. 27 years he was addicted to what we call a morphine patch, which was really just fentanyl. And for 27 years, it took him 27 years before he called me up from the front door of 999 Queen and said, "Hey, will you help me?" Right? And in 2 short years, he paid for his house. He had boat. He had motorcycle. I had a ride. He had 2 fast and high-speed cars. Then he died in a single vehicle accident because we told him, "You keep driving like that, you're going to die," and he did. But the idea was that until people become aware of the need to change, which is covered by this statement, until the pain of staying is greater than the pain of changing, nothing changes. And that's why I wish Trump would have put the tariffs up to 100% to start with, and try to awaken people out of the doldrums that they're sleeping in. They're asleep. And these questions, that's why I believe in the principles, why I believe in Randy and the scorecard. These are all things that'll nibble at these people's subconscious and help them become aware. It's going to be slow but sure. They're going to become aware of the truth. And then only then, like Bruce Purdy said, critical mass. Oh, then and only then will you need numbers. We need numbers of people to become aware of the state of affairs that this country is in. So,
and I agree with you 100%, Jack. And I love that statement too about the pain of change. It is so true. And I just think, was there ever a time in my life where I believed something that I thought turned out to be false? Yeah, I think maybe a couple of times. But the reality is that that could hold true around the critical thinking issue too. You could be kind of in denial and you could be just cruising along, and all of a sudden that pain formula hits your family or you or your job or something as a result of the political process. And all of a sudden you have no choice but to be a critical thinker because it's about survival at that point. So, or about a better life for your family. So, if we don't ask these 5 questions and what Charles says is perhaps true, then we haven't given people a chance to change. So that's how I look at it. I think it's so important. And as tough a challenge as it is, and as much as people don't want to listen, and they don't, what does it take? 20 years to be an overnight success, Rick? Something like that. So we got to keep at it. We can't give up.
When I become successful, I'll let you know.
I have a thing I call drop kicking someone through the goalposts of life, And I tell them the hound dog story. Like people come around whining. I tell them the hound dog story, and nobody whines around me once I tell them that story. Yeah. So. And sometimes you do have to give people a dose of reality. You have to drop kick them through the goalposts of life and make them awake and aware, and then let them make their choices. They can go back to sleep or they can change. It's one or the other. To change my friend who was an addict for 27 years, I rode up to his house on one of the Harleys I had. I said, "Let's go for a ride." And he said, and he was stoned on 8 or 9 joints and had his fentanyl patches on. And I told him, I said, "You know what? I'm done with you." I said, "We've been friends a long, long time, but I'm done. I'm not going to watch you commit suicide. I'm finished. And don't ever contact me. Don't ever call me till you're ready to change." And I drove off. And then in July 2016, he called me and said, "Hey, will you help me?" And he knows, and the rule was that you'll do exactly what I tell you. You won't question it. You'll just do it. And believe it or not, people have to get to that point mentally here. That's why I post, if we don't vote conservative, we're screwed. Not even like the guy that much. But we just need mass. We need that critical mass to go to the polls and drive these communists, and at least hope we have something to work with here. I'm a member of the United Party, right? But still, I believe we have to drive these liberals out, and hopefully they won't even be a party when we're done.
Given that social media can be a snake pit, and all the things that Rick has said today about the challenges we face with truth in that platform, on those platforms, I have seen some posts from people who seem very genuine, and they are saying that policies they've seen from one level of government or another have impacted them in such a negative way, whether it's their kids and education or whether it's financial and jobs or whatever, that they have hit that pain point that you're talking about. And they're stating it now publicly and saying, I'm not willing to go through this again. I'm going to change my perspective. And so there's hope. There's always hope. And I think by dialogue and talking like we are, we create the opportunity for people to ask themselves those two questions at the bottom, that are really critical. And whoever's going to represent us, no matter what government we have, whether it's the group of farmers like it used to be that sent the smart guy down to the city to talk, we need those people. We need those people with common sense, and we need them with the right attitudes. And hopefully we've covered a lot of that today in talking about this, because if everybody had this kind of a discourse with their friends and family over their kitchen table and beat it back and forth, the world would be a better place in about 3 months. And unfortunately, it's not going to happen. But, it's like you try to move the needle the best you can the time you have while you're on this, gifted to have on this planet. And, that's all this is about for me, is just trying to make sure that we create opportunity for change.
So shall we move on to question 5 here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Government control overreach. Do you guys need a break, or shall we?
No.
Ahead?
What I'm wondering is, we've had a really good discussion around free speech and really about freedom under question 4. Mm-hmm. Question 5 is really a continuation. It's a different slant on exactly the same question.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that government should not restrict individual freedom. It says, it asks the person, under what circumstances should it restrict individual freedom? Mm-hmm. And there will be such circumstances, just as there will be circumstances when government should regulate speech. But if we're going to choose representatives who represent us and who will make this a better country, then we need to ask them what they think and how they will act in those respects. And so Randy has said earlier, this is in part an education process. It was either Randy or Jack mentioned something about it takes 20 years to make this kind of transition. What this is a contribution to that thinking. And maybe, while I may have sounded doubtful that Canadians are capable of critical thought, maybe the circumstances now, the difficulty finding apartments that you can afford, the difficulty affording food of the quality you'd like to have for your children, maybe this is the time when people will start to ask those deeper questions and choose individuals of character who will stand for them and their rights. So this is what these questions is, as Randy said, it's a contribution, an attempt to help people focus their minds on the deeper questions that matter, not whether there should be a subsidy at $10 a day for daycare, or whether the government should control every doctor's pay or should provide dental care, but how will they protect our rights and our just interests? And will they represent us? And that's what's behind these questions. In this, and maybe people are open to it in this very difficult and turbulent time, which started long before Trump was reelected, as Canada's economy and the prospects for a good future began to diminish massively, particularly for the young.
Anybody?
Sometimes it's hard to follow Charles when he starts making sense like that. I liked it. I did.
I'm gonna flip things a little bit in this way. I think that when we saw the government respond to the pandemic the way they did, it was also a reflection of the failure of citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think back, the majority, the vast majority of people demanded of our government that people be locked down. I remember a debate before the development of the vaccines that I had with a lady online. I was really upset with her because she was like in favor of mandatory vaccinations. Of course, I'm not. But that was the thinking even going into it for many. And that's part of democracy. But I would say that we need a government that sometimes will do the opposite of what people want in our democracy in order to preserve our freedoms and to protect us from ourselves. And in that case, even our own fear. And our government failed to do that because they still locked us down. They still mandated us. They still required the masking. They did all of these things that really were the opposite response to what anything I'd ever seen in any emergency planning that I'd ever come across in all the years that I worked in media. And I sometimes did a lot of stories over the years with governments at various levels, and emergencies, emergency service agencies, police, EMS, firefighting, fire departments, who would have plans like this. They'd have mock disasters and they'd invite the media out and you'd see the emergency plans. You'd read them as part of these media events. And the response we got during the pandemic was the opposite of everything that had ever been planned for. Mm-hmm. Like that wasn't that certainly wasn't what I was expecting, but we got this opposite response and their plans just went right into the waste bin. But if you think back as well, what did Justin Trudeau do? He held an election. And what was the main issue at that time? It was the pandemic, remember? And he used that as a wedge issue. We brought that up earlier tonight. And that was, in my view, also wrong because that fueled fear, used fear as a political tool to get elected. And that's what the Liberals did. And that was misguided in the worst way. That's one of the reasons we're in the mess we're in right now today. So there's another step, another layer to this discussion that I think really warrants scrutiny here and observation. We need government that sometimes will do the opposite of what people are demanding at the time, because sometimes people don't ask for the right thing. People wanted the restrictions of many restricted in order to feel secure, but the response in my mind was the opposite that we got. We needed a government that should have said to the population, no, it's more important to preserve people's rights. And if you're sick, you stay home, but if you're well, you can still go out. Not the opposite.
I have to weigh in on this because this is personal.
Yeah. Sure.
When this whole thing rolled out, and we're talking about these questions that we're asking, right? We're talking about, should government have regulatory rights and free speech? If they regulate the speech, will they control the narrative? Is the narrative being pushed in the wrong direction when they, like you said, Rick, should be asking the opposite question? Mm-hmm. I went through all of that. And at the time, it was all run rolling. And I fought back against it, because I did not like what I was hearing, obviously, because of what I've created, and what we all are working towards. But my mom was 91 years old. She listened to the narrative. She did not get the benefit of that counterpoint. She listened to it all the time because she was at home watching TV. Mm-hmm. She lied to me, even though I told her that it was very important you don't see people, Mom, in the sidewalk. You don't see them dying outside your house. It's not that bad. Just tell her all of the options. she went out because a friend of hers told her to get inoculated with this genetic modification anyway. I ended up spending 3 months with her just after she got her second one and started to not feel
I need to
well.
caution you. We are on YouTube.
I know.
Speaking of, freedom of speech issues, but
Okay.
that's the only
Well,
platform that is an issue here. But
they may.
please continue.
But just let me say that whatever the reason was that she developed difficulty after that is that she ended up passing. And I don't know for sure if that was the case. I just think she should have had the benefit of the doubt of a counterpoint. And that was missing. And I couldn't agree more. And I think it's so important in our world, if we're ever going to get to the truth, that we have equal and fair opportunity to weigh those differences, because there are real life consequences to these things.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I
Did you
agree
know?
with that. Yeah.
Did you know? Okay. Do you know how you define Satanism? Very simple. Very simple.
Okay, too much.
Force, threatening, fear, coercion, all the things that force you in a direction that you instinctively in your spirit know you shouldn't go. But fear, it's fear will motivate you, and love will motivate you, but fear was used during the COVID period, and it's just and it's all, as far as I'm concerned, it was all satanically based. When you force people to do things, you drag ministers down the road, even if they're not of your church, it was wrong, right? It was wrong. They dragged or drove out Padawaski, and they fined Henry Hildebrand $280,000, and it's like, we'll beat you into submission. That is satanic rule, period.
Well, we have had court decisions in a federal court that confirms that the actions of the government violated the Constitution. And we've had a recent ruling in, I think it's a superior court in Ontario. Not sure it's an appeal court in the Randy Hillier case, that a decision against him for participating in some rallies was unconstitutional. So there is a pushback against this. I will make an observation, though, on the ruling in the federal court. It's actually a very disturbing ruling in some ways, because what the judge said was in his ruling, and I'm paraphrasing here, I went into this thinking the government was right to have implemented the mandates. And now I'm coming into my own elaboration, the paraphrase. But there were two bright young women lawyers who came in here and convinced me that I was wrong, and I have to rule that this was unconstitutional. But then he went on to say, and so I advise the government to change the law so that it can do the next time what it did this time that breaks the law. So what we've got there is a clear indication from the judge at the beginning. He went in with a bias. He was persuaded he could not press his bias, but he told the government how to get around the law that caused him to do that. Others may look at that judgment and say, I'm not getting this quite right. But I think that's what that judgment said. And to me, that's very, very deeply troubling.
Well, of course it is.
That our institutions at all levels come with bias in the way they apply their mandates, their mandates in their organizations they're in ways that impose bias that undermine the rights and freedoms of Canadians. And so these questions are about that. All of them are saying, if you are seeking public office, where do you stand? Do you stand for us? Or do you stand for something else that we don't know about? Are you going to impose upon us, on our rights, our ancient rights and freedoms? That it's an attempt to try to push the thought back to character, not to law, not to statute, but to the character of the individual and where they stand. And they're simple questions. They should be asked by persons who vote Green, who vote NDP, who vote Liberal, who vote Conservative. It makes no difference. There's simple, straightforward questions that look at character and the nature of the job.
I would be very interested in seeing what we would be talking about after the election in this format. What do you say, Rick?
Well, I look forward to having you guys back, and as often as you would like to come back, because these are important conversations, and I welcome them, and the broad spectrum of views on these subjects, these 5 questions. Look how far we've come tonight, just on these 5 questions. The depth that we've touched. You know, these are fundamental to our society, our country.
I have hope in the crowds that Poiliever is gathering, but then he opens his mouth and talks about fighting the U.S. It's like a gnat on an elephant's ass. It's like me, you know, what do you call it? You're getting a ride with it, and Andre the Giant, you know, and then letting me bring some of my friends and they're making a mess in the back seat, and he wants me to tell him to clean up and stop it, or he wants a few more bucks for gas, and me tell him, go to hell, like, we're gonna ride with you. You want, you know, it's ludicrous, but I still think he's the lesser of 2 evils. And anything's better than what we have.
Rick, I would like to thank you, Rick, for what you do. We are four individuals who have our own connections, and some of them quite wide. And we see a lot of concern about the nature, the way the country is, and the way it's going. And we see little insufficient discussion and debate, and room for having these issues explored, and for letting Canadians hear other ideas than those that are pressed in the structured way that they normally are. All of us think that Canadians are not fools. We think they're trapped. We think they need to be exposed to other ideas, and that free speech of the sort we're having here tonight, where different ideas are put forward and pressed, can be heard, and that Canadians can begin to think who should represent us and how can we move forward in a constructive way. And so thank you for having doing what you do every night with so many other voices, and for giving us the opportunity to be here with you.
Yeah. No, my honor to have you guys here tonight. Anybody else with final thoughts this evening before we wrap up?
Okay, I'll just let these guys go. I'll just quickly say that in my books, you're as good as Joe Rogan without the vulgarities, right? Seriously, this program in this country, you're top of the line.
Well, thank you. And thank you for tolerating me tonight. I appreciate that very much. I really do. And you guys are great. I really appreciate the views that you brought here tonight. I love our principles, and these 5 questions are right on target. And Canadians deserve answers to them as we move ahead. And cross your fingers and hope that we preserve or restore or reclaim freedom after April 28th. Gentlemen.
Rick, can I leave you with a final thought?
Absolutely.
You know, what you talked about there a moment ago, it triggered me. Like, foundational representation is what we're after, not superficial representation, not anything other than foundational, because we're talking about people over government. We're talking about representation of the people. So critical. And, you know, all the issues come and go, they change, but our rights and freedoms and our that are inherent is that foundation that we are asking those who represent us to honor. And that we ask nothing more, just as simple as that. And we ask people to ask them to do that.
And what I'm going to do before we sign off is I'm going to put the website up there for politicalscorecards.ca, correct?
Correct.
See if I spelled that correctly as I put it up on the screen. Politicalscorecards.ca. So if you would like to learn more about what Political Scorecards is about, or just find those 5 questions so you can take them to your local politicians as you get ready for this election, that is the website, folks, politicalscorecards.ca. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, Mavericks, I will see everybody back here tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Eastern, on the flip side. And I'll throw it over to Cosmo, my best friend, and Maverick and the News Brothers. Here's Free Dog to take us out. See you tomorrow night on the flip side.
Well, I heard old Cosmo howling last night up on the hill where the moon shines so bright. He was singing a tune, lonesome dogs cry about freedom, running and touching the sky. If I leave here tomorrow, won't you still remember me? Cosmo's free, running wild, wild as the wind can be. He's a free dog, he's a free dog, he's a free dog. Cosmo's got them paws that just itch to roam. He's chasing his dreams, he's far from home. With a heart full of love and a spirit so free, he's living his life wild and carefree. If I leave here tomorrow, won't you still remember me? Cosmo's free, running wild, wild as the wind can be. He's a free dog, he's a free dog, he's a free dog. He's got the stars in his eyes, the wind in his fur, a tail that wags like it's never heard of a blur. Cosmo's on a journey, he's got no chains. He's running through fields, breaking all the lanes. Now the night's getting cold and the sky's turning gray, but Cosmo's still out there, he's miles away. He's not looking back, he's got his path to tread. With every step, he's leaving his bed. If I leave here tomorrow, won't you still remember me? Cosmo's free, running wild, wild as the wind can be. He's a free dog, he's a free dog, he's a free dog. So if you're feeling lost, just think of Cosmo's run. Remember his spirit, his freedom, his fun. And maybe one day, when you're feeling alone, you'll find your own freedom and let your spirit go. If I leave here tomorrow, won't you still remember me? Cosmo's free, running wild, wild as the wind can be. He's a free dog, he's a free dog, he's a free dog. In his eyes, the wind in his fur, a tail that wags like it's never heard of a bird. A heart full of love and a spirit so free. He's living his life wild and carefree. He's got the stars in his eyes, the wind in his fur, a tail that wags like it's never heard a bird. Cosmo's on a journey, he's got no chains. He's running through fields, breaking all the lanes.
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.